At COP, we heard from a whole range of well-known faces from across the globe, like Sir David Attenborough, like Greta Thunberg and Prince Charles, as well as a whole host of world leaders, President Biden, Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron as well. But there was one person who frankly stole the show, and she wasn't even here, and that's Her Majesty the Queen, appropriately dressed in green. She addressed a conference in which she talked about how history has shown that nations, when they come together in a common cause, that there is always room for hope. She also touchingly praised her efforts of her husband, her son Prince Charles and Prince William for their continued efforts, she said, to try and protect the fragile earth in which we live. And she also sent a not too subtle message, it must be said, to world leaders, in which she talked about how she'd observed, and she has been around for a long time, what leaders do for people is government and politics when it's today, but what they do for people tomorrow, that is statesmanship. Again, asking, pleading, I think, to a degree with world leaders, not just to come up with words, but to deal with what she and others would argue is the immediate threat of climate change, that the time for speaking is over, the time for action has arrived. And that is a message we heard time and time again, isn't it, from world leaders here. It must be said, though, there is a slightly gloomy tinge to it all, because there is a sense that actually there are not enough leaders on that same page. We heard from the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, in which he said that his country is not prepared to try and get to carbon neutral until 2070. That's a whole 20 years later than when the UN would like that target to be reached. Though today, at day 2, world leaders are going to remain here, and the effort and focus is going to be on forests and trees and an attempt to protect them. And it's going to be announced later on that leaders representing 85% of the world's forests are going to commit to halt and reverse the deforestation and land degradation by the end of this decade. Interestingly, we're going to hear from, again, Prince Charles and again President Biden and Emmanuel Macron. But this deal does seem to encompass countries like Canada, Brazil, also the Congo, Indonesia and Russia. But many would suggest, on previous history of what has happened to rainforests and to trees and forests across the world, actually, is it enough? We know that they've been destroyed in places like the Amazon rainforest and in Siberia too. President Putin, President Bolsonaro, not even in Glasgow this week for COP26. And that is why these next 2 weeks are going to kind of be quite crucial. So when the world leaders leave later on today, it will then be up to the delegates, the thousands that have gathered here in Glasgow, to try and thrash a deal out. But you have to remember, the deal that they're trying to reach is actually trying to stick by what was agreed in Paris 6 years ago, to try and cap those global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. Most scientists think that is now nigh impossible unless there was dramatic action. That seems very unlikely, and that is why there is a bit of a gloom to this conference. But not all hope, the leaders would argue, is lost, and that is why what happens here in Glasgow, as I say, over the next 10 days or so, will be crucial. Many of those world leaders will return for the end of that conference in the hope that some progress can be made.